Good evening and welcome to a program with Amos Guiora. Our speaker, Amos Guiora, is professor of law at the Quinney School of Law at the University of Utah. He is a distinguished fellow at the Consortium for the Research and Study of the Holocaust at Chicago-Kent College of Law, and a distinguished fellow and counselor at the International Center for Conflict Resolution at the University of Pittsburgh. For 20 years, Amos was in the legal department of the Israeli Army and retired as a colonel. Today's talk is sponsored by the Contra Costa Jewish Community Center and Congregation Beth Emek, with co-sponsors of Congregation B'nai Shalom and Congregation B'nai Tikva. Amos will talk on the Israeli court system in the current war and the issues that are under criticism by the Netanyahu government. Please welcome Amos Guiora. Thank you.
Reva and friends, and Claire, thanks so much for having me. I guess I could begin with a light note and say, I assume most of you watched the game yesterday. So with that said, we can move on from the Super Bowl and get down to the nitty gritty. So when Reba invited me to speak tonight, I suggested a whole list, literally, of possible topics because the issues are also germane to where we are. And I thought maybe the best usage of the few minutes we have is to try to address X number of issues. And if I do this compellingly, then you all will ask questions. And from my perspective, you can ask anything you want to ask, because I think that's the most important and effective way to have a conversation. So we are in February of 2024, and I take you back to November of 2022, when this government came to power. And for reasons that I'm not really sure are 100% clear, but here we are. Literally the first thing they did, they put forward this agenda to minimize, eviscerate the rule of law, and to eviscerate for what for me is judicial activism, and to ensure that the Israeli Supreme Court have little, if any, power over the government, the Knesset. And it took a month or so for those of the other side, frankly, full disclosure, such as myself, to take to the streets, which we obviously did beginning in December, January, until October 7th, and I'll obviously get to October 7th, because there was a clear realization that this government, whether it came from Netanyahu or came from the Justice Minister, Levine, or from the head of the Judiciary Committee, Rothman, whoever it came from, the intention was clear, A, to minimize the judicial review power of the Supreme Court. But I also think it's more nefarious than that. And that is that Netanyahu, who is, I'm sure all of you know, is under a trial, albeit the district court in Jerusalem that's hearing the case couldn't be slower. I mean, it's an embarrassment. I think Netanyahu was also thinking, quote unquote, what we in America would call court stacking, court packing, because I think he was thinking about, he understands that he'll be convicted, which he will be. And he was thinking about the appeal and why he would need a quote unquote friendly Supreme Court. And it became clear to those of us from the center left or center right, center left, that not only is the court under attack, but democracy is under attack. And it was remarkable to watch the regular Saturday night demonstrations. I remind all of you, every Saturday night, there were about 400,000 Israelis demonstrating. Easy numbers, that's 20 million Americans, if you do the math, every Saturday night. And as someone who participated in many of those, I can also tell you, it wasn't always a lot of fun. The interactions with the police were not always pleasant. Interactions with the Bibi supporters, albeit there were a few of them out there, was not always fun. As Reva mentioned, I served 20 years in the IDF. It's no fun being called a traitor. It's no fun being called an anarchist. And I leave to your imagination what else I was called. And certainly when I had my interactions with the police, that wasn't pleasant, but that's okay. Because if you're fighting for democracy, you're fighting for democracy. ultimately, the Supreme Court, a petition was filed to the Supreme Court, and the court ruled against the government, which was extraordinarily significant because it was a reflection that yes, democracy wins and the rule of law reigns. And I cannot emphasize to all of you enough, I don't know how many of you are lawyers, but the way the Israeli government is structured, there's a Knesset, there's the executive, we'll call it, kind of, and the Supreme Court sitting as the High Court of Justice. Again, I don't know how many of you are lawyers, but about 30 years ago, the former president, Chief Justice of the Israeli Supreme Court, Aaron Barak, ruled that there are no standing requirements, which is a very un-American principle, which meant that anybody can file a petition against an action of the government, present action of the government, or future action. And that was the way to ensure that there would be judicial oversight of the government. And that's exactly what they wanted to do away with. Eviscerate is the more appropriate term. And I think that most of us, when we realized exactly what they meant to do, what they intended to do, we took to the streets. And I'm sure that books will be written about how the demonstrations from the street up, from the ground up, from the people, simply took to the streets and said, no more. Khalas, enough. Some of you may recall that, I think it was in July, there was a march from Tel Aviv to Jerusalem. It's a 4-day march. I did 3 of the 4 days. And I spent part of the walk with a woman who is beyond extraordinary, whose name is Shikma Bresler, and she's one of the 3 organizers of the demonstrations. She's a PhD in particle physics at Weizmann Institute, and she, like many others, simply stopped their lives, and this is what they did. And when I was walking with Shikma and a couple of others, she was clear about this, and I want to emphasize this to you. There is no plan B. I think more than anything, one of the things that I think all of us took away, that we realized that here was a government that was intent on destroying democracy. And that's, from my perspective, as someone who's written about this and participated and has been involved, that's the bottom line. There's an Israeli government that was intent on destroying democracy. And a significant percentage of the public stood up and said, no. Does that mean 100%? No, because obviously all of you know we're a complicated society, right? There are 10 million of us, 20% Israeli Arabs, 20% Hasidic, and then obviously the Likud voters. And one of the really unfortunate things that occurred over the summer was, efforts notwithstanding, we could not get Israeli Arabs to participate, which was unfortunate. Even though they're well aware of the fact that this is Kafka, the Minister of State Security, Itamar Ben-Gvir, who should be in jail for racism, fascism, and incitement and violence. He's unhinged, and I think they're a little bit afraid of him. That also needs to be stated. It was unfortunate we couldn't get them to participate. Obviously, the Hasidic are the Hasidic. We'll come back to them. But if you have 400,000 every week, it took its toll, because it's not only is it every Saturday night, not only was there the march, that 4-day march, there were rallies at the Knesset, there were rallies here, everywhere. And I have a sense that even though the Supreme Court ultimately ruled in our favor, that the government was going to have to back down, because I think they were totally caught off guard by the vociferousness of the protesters, of the demonstrators, and the extent to which people were willing to stop their lives. Not only that, economic considerations are also relevant here. The high-tech industry took a hit. I emphasize, people stopped working, people stopped their lives. It was remarkable. And then came October 7th. So as I told Riva and Claire, I was in Paris when October 7th happened. I was on vacation with my wife, and I was sound asleep in Paris when my wife gave me a kick and said, there's a war at home. And probably like everybody else, I couldn't quite believe it. And then we obviously cut our vacation short and raced home like anybody else. And I think we also need to say the truth about October the 7th. I hope to God none of you have seen the real videos from October 7th. I hope you've all been spared. I've been made privy to the videos, and I want to begin with that. What happened on October 7th makes the Holocaust look like Holocaust light. That needs to be stated. What was done to women in terms of sexual violence is, anything I tell you will just be a modicum of what actually happened. And there's no doubt that October 7th, Israel, I don't know if Riva mentioned, I live in Israel. I commute between Salt Lake and Jerusalem. Israel will never be the same. Life will never be the same. not only because 1,400 Israelis were murdered in a way that is indescribable on October 7th, not only because there are the 100+ hostages still being held, not because I don't know how many soldiers have been killed as of today, and I don't remember how many soldiers have been wounded as of today, and also there are 150,000 Israelis who've been evacuated. As I told the ladies before we went on, I'm very open about this. My daughter-in-law and grandson, who with my son, live in Kibbutz Dan, which is Israel's northernmost kibbutz. They've been evacuated to Haifa, where they have been since the middle of October, and will be there until who knows. Take all that together, and here we are in a war on February 13th or 12th, right? Today's the 12th or 13th, with no end in sight. And the tragic reality of the no end in sight is a result of the following. One, Netanyahu, who, and I want to be very open about this, I loathe him, hate him, and despise him. I just want to make that very clear. He has one interest, and that is to keep the war going. And that's for two reasons. One, he knows that if there will be elections tomorrow, Reva asked me jokingly, will he be prime minister in 6 months? If there are elections tomorrow, he loses big time. I have no doubt about that. And the other thing that scares the hell out of Bibi Netanyahu is he certainly doesn't want to wear orange, because he knows that if he's no longer prime minister, the trial will pick up and he'll be convicted and then he'll go to jail. So what motivates the prime minister of Israel is one thing and one thing only, and that's staying in power. He is beholden, that's in polite English, to two people, well, 3 or 4. First of all, he's beholden to his wife. The other person, I know for Americans that's hard to understand, but it's true. The other person he's beholden to is his son. Again, hard for Americans to understand that, it's true. The 2 members of his government to whom he's beholden are Ben Gvir, who I mentioned a second ago, and the finance minister, Smotrich, who is a racist fascist also, but they've got him where it hurts. And the reason they've got him where it hurts is, again, parliamentary system. Netanyahu's government has a majority of 64. There's a thing called, in the parliamentary system, something called a vote of no confidence. And if we don't get 4 or 5 members of his government to turn against him in the vote of no confidence, then Netanyahu will continue as prime minister. One of the things that in an ideal world, whatever the hell that word means, is that there would be a mechanism, means, ways to convince the 4 or 5, what are called the wavering members of his government, who know that this is awful, terrible, and indefensible, to, in easy language, to turn against him, to vote in favor of no confidence, or at least to go to him and say they will vote no confidence, and to thereby have the government fall. Absent that, this government will stay in power until November 26, when our next elections are scheduled. One of the things that people like me, because the center left, that people like me hope is that when the reservists start coming home, because you can't keep 250,000 reservists forever, when the reservists start coming home, that there will be enough pressure on those 4 or 5 to go to Netanyahu and say, Dainu, enough is enough. And one of the things that, if you track this very carefully, you will see that in the last 3 weeks, I think, that there are more and more demonstrations on Saturday night. I don't know how many of you have been to Tel Aviv recently. So if you go to where the district court is, you'll see it's called now Hostage Square, where the hostages' families are. But because many of the hostages' families have requested that people not protest against the government, there's now a bifurcated approach on Saturday nights, Motzei Shabbat. One over here, right over here, there are people who are protesting against the government, and then they walk, to Hostage Square to be, rally around the families and to express sympathy for them. Because for the hostage families, it's important not to criticize the government, but there's going to be a but here in a second. But the fact that more and more Israelis are willing to protest against the government while, and I emphasize this, while they're, Sandra, I'll come to you, I promise, while their children are in harm's way is remarkable. I don't know from an American audience if that's something that quite makes sense. For Israelis to protest against the government while their children are in harm's way took people a long time to make that decision. We've decided, I'm here now, but I'm going home in 2 weeks. Friends of ours are out there demonstrating against the government, even though children are in harm's way. because there's a realization, recognition that, again, there is no plan B. Full stop. I'm sure you all saw, if you didn't see that, now I'll tell you that last night during the time zone thing, 2 hostages were rescued in a rescue mission. So a huge shout out to the IDF and to the Shabak, the General Security Services, to pull this off in Rafiah. No words. I mean, literally no words. As great as that is, and it is great, and the courage and the bravery, standing ovation. That, however, must not blind us to 2 things. One, that the government is responsible for October 7th, and 2, that there are still 100 hostages being held by Hamas. So while Bibi had his, his photo opportunity today, he got a nice picture with the unit commander. Yeah, he got the picture. Great for him. The truth of the matter is that last week Netanyahu said no to the hostage deal. He has made it clear that he's all about victory. He even now has this stupid hat that says Nitzachon, victory. I have no idea what victory means here. Because as Riva mentioned, I served for 5 years in the Gaza Strip, 3 as a legal advisor of the Gaza Strip, There is no defeating Hamas. We need to put an end to that fallacy. We may whack Hamas, we may kill Hamas, we may destroy infrastructure. But in the meantime, we're obviously also causing extraordinary damage to Gaza. We're also clearly innocent civilians are dying, that's obvious. And we're not going to defeat Hamas. It is a political term that I don't know if Netanyahu really believes it or not. The problem with it, and I'm going to take a deep breath, and this will offend some of you. And as an Israeli, this is difficult to say. And if you're offended, so be it. Soldiers are going to die in vain. We need to be very, very honest about this, even if that pisses you off. Because if we're not going to defeat Hamas, we're not. So the question is, why the hell are we continuing to fight? For me, the most important issue, I don't know if the only issue, but clearly the top issue, is the release of the hostages. I remind all of you that one of the reasons that Hamas on October 7th was so easily able to move into Israel are 3 different reasons. And we need to be honest about this. One, I don't know how many of you have been to the Hamas, the Gaza-Israel border, but if you had been, you would see there were 3 balloons, 3 intelligence gathering balloons on the border. Those had been cyber attacked. And so the soldiers who were responsible for gathering information were blind. I mean, literally blind because they weren't gathering information. 2, there had been a 1.5 battalion of Israeli soldiers on the Israeli side of the Gaza border who were moved to the West Bank a few days before. Why were they moved to the West Bank? They were moved to the West Bank because Netanyahu had to placate Ben-Gvir and Smotrich in order to appease the settlers. So you take soldiers who are here guarding the damn border between Gaza and Israel, you ship them to the West Bank to appease the settlers, to appease Ben-Gvir and Smotrich, and you left the kibbutzim, Kfar Aza and the others, Be'eri, absolutely and totally unguarded. When there has been pressure, I will answer your question. The fact that the border was unguarded is a direct reflection of the government's appeasement of the settlers. To his wife, sure. Those of you who follow Israeli politics for the past, however Netanyahu has been around, know that his wife, who has been on trial in the past, in polite English, exercises extraordinary power over him. She sits in on security briefings. She plays a role in appointments. She is able to exercise power over the prime minister in a way that is extraordinary. His son, Yair, who is in Miami, not in reserve duty because he doesn't do reserve duty because he's in Miami, is all about social media. He is a vile, and I'm using the word deliberately, inciter against the army, against the Shabak, and against the left. It's well known that there's Netanyahu before he meets with his wife and kid and after he meets with his wife and kid. And the fact that we have a wife and son who is vile, he's on trial all the time for defamation here and defamation there, and then countersuits. When he and she, the wife, when they post against the IDF and against the Shabak and against particular politicians, it's really coming from him. So when I tell you that the prime minister of the state of Israel is beholden to his wife And son, I meant exactly that. What are the consequences? The consequences are, give you some examples. Don't ask me the date, because when you have a kid in harm's way, as we do, dates all meld together. In the middle of one of the nights, he blasted the IDF and Benny Gantz. It came from her, and then they retracted it. They rescinded, they retracted. She has the power over him that I know for an American audience is unfathomable, but it's true. It is awful. So when you take all this together, one of the questions that I'm consistently asked is, like, where do we go from here? What's the day after? What does it look like? So one of the really interesting questions, of which there are many, is what will Gaza look like when this is over? Will Gaza be Hamas free? So people like me, and I think Riva knows this, I've spent 15 years, 5 officially and 10 unofficially, involved in negotiations with Palestinians. And when I was involved in the unofficial negotiations with Palestinians for the past 10 years, the conditions for meeting Israelis and Palestinians, the condition for meeting was that Gaza was not on the table and nobody from Hamas would be in the room. Think about that for a second. So we all talk about two-state solution, two-state solution. The truth of the matter is, if you really talk to a Palestinian from the West Bank, Palestinian Authority, and you ask them, can there really be a Palestinian state with Gaza, Hamas? The answer is no, because I remind all of you that the Palestinian Authority controlled Gaza after Oslo from 94 until 2005. And then there were elections and Hamas won. But not only did Hamas win in the elections, but they literally shot, pew, 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 they shot the guys from the Palestinian Authority or threw them off buildings. The West Bankers want nothing to do with Gaza. That's the truth. So one of the ways that to move forward into some kind of a day the day after is a Hamas-less Gaza possible? And if it's Hamas-less, then would the Palestinian Authority come back to Gaza the way it had been from 94 to 2004? Maybe, hopefully. One of the ways to make that happen, or one of the great questions here, who the hell is going to pay for all this? So the obvious and easy answer is Qatar, because it's going to take a ton of money. And I don't want to get into American politics, but one doesn't need to be a genius to understand that if the present president of the United States loses in the election to the former president of the United States, the question of American aid is a serious question, because to rebuild Gaza is going to take an enormous amount of money. It's also very clear that Egypt wants no part of Gaza. Those of you who follow this obsessively like I do know that on Saturday, Egypt put 40 tanks on the Egyptian side of the Gaza border. They didn't put them there for decoration. They put them there as a clear message to Gazans, don't try to come into Egypt, because if you Gazans try to come into Egypt, then there are 40 tanks waiting for you. The Egyptians are also scared of Hamas because they want no interaction between Hamas and the Islamic Brotherhood, because if there's one thing that scares Sisi, it's the Muslim Brotherhood. There are other countries who are wannabes. The Turks would love to be involved, but obviously Turkey can't be involved in anything because they just can't be. And somewhere out there is Russia and China. The Saudis, who Bibi was counting on that there would be some kind of rapprochement between or arrangement, whatever, between Israel and Saudi Arabia. The Saudis have made it very clear that absent the establishment of a Palestinian state, there won't be any deal between Israel and Saudi Arabia, the Abrahamic Accords notwithstanding. Jordan is not relevant to anything, and Syria is also not relevant whatsoever. And I assume there are probably a couple of European powers that would like to be involved, but that's a misnomer. There are no European powers. So it all is going to come down to the United States and Qatar. With respect to how we do this, here are some unpleasant things to consider. Right, Riva, you said we can have an honest discussion here. There's a long discussion in Israel about the following. I assume that many of you have seen the videos of when they brought the hostages back to Gaza on October 7th. And I apologize for the terminology, and if you're offended, sei gesund. You watch the Gazans greeting the Hamas guys bring particularly the women hostages back. It looks like group orgy. It's ecstasy. And there are people in Israel, even to the left of me, right, who say that given October 7th could not have happened without broad-based support in the Gazan population. And there is this school of thought that says that Hamas in Gaza, which won the election in 2006, to really understand Hamas and to really make October 7th happen, you need far more than the 3,000 guys who did October 7th, and far more than the whatever it is now, the 10,000 or 15,000 who have been killed, that there's this notion of broad-based support in the Gazan population. And the question then is, who is an innocent and who is not innocent? That's an open question that I don't think anybody, frankly, has an answer to. Were that not enough, according to a public opinion poll in the West Bank, and public opinion polls in the West Bank are very, very, very reliable. 65% of the West Bank secular population supports October the 7th. That's a problem when we think about how do we go about building something together. On the other hand, as someone who lives there and obviously has a dog in the fight, the present situation is absolutely and totally untenable. I don't know, Riva, if I told you this, I'm holding up my cell phone deliberately, right? I literally live, from text message to text message like any other Israeli. That's not sustainable. And that's why more than anything, what we need is the following. The only adult in the building, from my perspective, is President Joe Biden. He's the only one who can grab Netanyahu where it hurts and squeeze hard. I gave a talk 10 days ago to hundreds of people here in Salt Lake City, and I was asked a question which is absolutely legitimate. Why should the United States of America continue supporting Israel? That's a really viable question. And I told the gentleman who asked me, I said, that's a question that needs to be on the table. And I just saw today that the Dutch are going to stop sending parts for F-35s. That's also relevant. I mean, it really is a question. How long will the world continue to support? Pictures of Rafiq speak for themselves. And that's why we really need to have this recognition, understanding that the end needs to come now. So right before joining the call, I saw that Netanyahu evidently, one has to be careful with what he says, because he says that what it says on Monday is irrelevant on Tuesday, has given the green light to the head of the Mossad, to David Barnea, to go to Cairo to negotiate. I'm not exactly sure who will be meeting in Cairo to try to do some kind of a hostage release. Will that also result in a ceasefire? One would certainly hope so. And then only then can we actually begin the process of taking a deep breath and moving then to the day after. The pressure on Netanyahu internally because of Smotrich, Ben Gvir, and a couple of members of his own government are serious. Netanyahu, for him, he's Mussolini, the state is me and I am the state, which is why, full circle, why those 4 or 5 individuals in the government who I have no doubt, including one who, Yoav Gallant, who I think Riva knows this, Gallant, who's the defense minister, I was his legal advisor, and Avi Dichter, who I worked with for many years, somewhere here, they know that they are complicit, and for which they will bear serious political consequences. And that's why at the end of the day, what this will require is enormous enormous pressure on Netanyahu, and a constant pressure inside Israel on those 4 or 5 members of the government to have them turn against Netanyahu, because the current situation, which is seemingly endless, is utterly and totally unsustainable. It is beyond, I don't know how many of you have family in Israel, how many of you have been to Israel recently. It is beyond exhausting. It's unsustainable. We're taking a huge economic hit. The lowering of Israel's rating the other day, which the finance minister laughed at. I mean, he needs to be fired. By the way, if Netanyahu had an ounce of any sense of state responsibility, he would get rid of these 2 guys, Smotrich and Ben Gvir, but that is not part of what Bibi is able to do, because that's just not him. That's where we are. Riva asked me to speak for 30 minutes. I spoke for 31. Questions, anxieties, concerns, unless I put you all to sleep.
People should write in the chat their questions, and he will answer them.
I will. And by the way, I'm not only that, but I'm all, we put in the chat room, right? Claire, you put my what's it called? My email. Anybody who wants to reach out to me offline, you are more than welcome.
Are there any questions? Julia, if you're trying to speak,
You're muted, I think, Julia.
No, I wish you answered everything. I'm leaving for Israel in the morning, so
Oh, wow.
I'll email you, I'll text you.
Nesiat tova.
Toda raba.
Any questions? If there are none, you want to speak a little bit more? Oh, there's one question. Oh, no. Amos, no, that's your email. If there are no
questions are coming.
oh, there are. Okay.
There's one from Steve Goodman. Do you believe there will be a resolution?
I guess the question of resolution, first of all, Steve, depends on how you define resolution. Sinwar, the head of Hamas, who's somewhere in the tunnels. Now let's go back. There's clearly pressure, tension between what we call internal Hamas and external Hamas. There are two guys in the tunnels. First guy is Sinwar, who's a total psychopath, who's responsible for October 7th. And the second one is Mohammed Def. In parentheses, I put, when I served as a legal advisor in 94 to 97, every damn week I would hear, this week we're killing Mohammed Def, this week we're killing Mohammed Def, and this week we're killing Mohammed Def. Okay, so we didn't kill Mohammed Def. And then there are the two guys outside, Khania and Khaled Mashal. Khaled Mashal is the one who, when Netanyahu was first elected prime minister in 96, that he sent the Mossad to poison him in Amman, didn't succeed, and that's why we released Sheikh Yassin. It was just a miserable operation. There's clearly pressure and tension between the two in and the two out. Sometimes when one reads the negotiation, Qatar, Egypt, America, there's, I think, also intra-Hamas negotiations between the two of them and the two of them. And to your question, Steve, I don't know enough to know how that would be resolved. I mean, I've been involved in, told you, 15 years of negotiation. There's always tension between the ins and the outs. There's been discussion, a very interesting discussion, about giving what we call in English, what we would call immunity, letting Def and Sinwar go to Qatar, Egypt, Turkey, wherever, let them go. Then we would kill them down the road. But again, that would be as a mechanism for hostage release. Resolution. So the easy answer is, Palestinian state, but I don't know if that's really at the moment viable. So I think resolution, I wouldn't call it resolution. I would call it A, release of the hostages, and B, ceasefire. And we can have a long discussion about what exactly the word ceasefire means. Does that also mean the idea of pulling out of Gaza or leaving the Gaza, or some kind of, I don't know if an international force? There's this thing in New York, you may have heard of it, called the UN, which is one of the most useless organizations the good Lord ever created. I mean, they're good for cocktail parties on the East River, but not much else. That's why I think for now, Steve, I wouldn't use the word, if I may, I wouldn't use the word resolution. I would call hostage release plus ceasefire.
Another question, could you please explain what being beholden to wife and son entails? What are the implications?
I already answered that. I already answered that about Bibi's wife and his kid.
Okay. Is there anything Jews in the United States can do? Do you think demonstrations help put pressure?
That is a great question. I go back and forth on this one. I begin with the following, and if I offend some of you, as Reba knows, I don't really care, right? Too old. I get emails from what I would call the right side of the American Jewish political stream, who tell me what Israel should do. And my response to that is, and actually, Julia, I'm looking at you while I answer this. My response to that is, if your kid isn't in harm's way, you're respectfully requested to keep your opinion to yourself. Those of us who have children in harm's way, on that note, we don't need your opinion, right? October 7th happened. I became very involved. I volunteered to raise money because evidently I was able to do that well. For things that the government should pay for, because the government is non-functioning, we needed to raise money for all kinds of things. I think the most important thing, if you ask me, in terms of American Jewish activism, is to put unending support on Netanyahu to release the hostages. Listen, I don't know the numbers, and we could sit here for hours. Is it how many of them are still alive? I see somebody asked how many are still alive. Who the hell knows? And who the hell knows? And we're all adults here, right? One can, trust me, you can't even imagine what's being done, has been done to the women. Trust me. The pressure that needs to be put, if any, on the Israeli government is not to tell us how to fight here, how to fight there. We're fine, thank you. But to put unending pressure on Netanyahu to release the hostages. And I know that Biden, I assume you all read it wherever on Slate today, how Biden referred to him. I referred to Netanyahu far harsher than Biden. But I don't think Netanyahu understands at all, because he's just like that. Doesn't understand the hostage situation. He doesn't. That, I think, Riva, to yours or one of your friends' question, where the American Jewish community can play a role is the hostage question. It is unconscionable. And I wrote this last week. When he said no to the hostage deal last Thursday at whatever the hell time was, he in essence signed the death sentence for Israelis. That's unconscionable. And yes, 2 were rescued. God love the soldiers who saved them. Unbelievable operation. He signed their death warrant. That's unconscionable.
Another question. Biden made a statement recently about settler violence in the West Bank. Here in the States, we do not hear a lot about what is happening. What is happening with settler violence?
So the settlers are taking full advantage of the fact that they got cover from Ben Gvir and Smotrich, and settler violence has been a real spike. And I was absolutely delighted, thrilled that finally there was an American president who said no more and denies access to the United States of America of the 4, taking their property away. All kinds of measures the U.S. is taking. Finally, there was an American president with balls on that one. In addition to that, if we're already talking about that related to this, again, I apologize because the days all run together for me. So somewhere over the weekend, the President of the United States of America did something that no president has ever done before. He gave Israel 45 days to file a report answering the question whether or not Israel is violating international law in Gaza. However the report will be written, that is the first time that an American president has demanded, given like a homework assignment. You have 45 days. And the other thing that I was sent sometime in the middle of the night was a statement from the White House that Israel and other countries, I've never seen Israel included this before, has to explain how it's using American weapons. I've never seen that before. So that tells me that Biden and or advisors, I don't know how it works. The president doesn't call me, are literally at wit's end with Netanyahu. And I think their patience is here. And I remind all of us, we haven't even talked about, I don't know how much time, Riva, we have. There's a thing called the Houthis and the international shipping. And in Iran, the president of the United States of America, he's a distracted sort of fella. He's got the Houthis firing here. He's got Iran over here. And he's, from his perspective, the more time he has to spend trying to resolve this goddamn thing between Israel and Gaza, or Israel and Hamas, is a huge drain on his time. And again, I don't know if you want to get into American politics. So if I piss some of you off, it is what it is. I also have no doubt the President of the United States of America reads the New York Times and is aware of the fact that the liberal wing of the Democratic Party is increasingly concerned, if not critical, of what is perceived to be his support of Israel and how that would affect the presidential election. That's also a reality. And I think that's one of the reasons that Biden is literally, maybe wit's end is too jocular of a term, but I think he's literally at wit's end with Netanyahu, who I don't think Netanyahu fully appreciates and understands the extent, and you people know more than I do, because I split my time. I have a sense, if I'm wrong, you all will correct me, that the power brokers in the Democratic Party are increasingly fed up with Israel. And how that will play itself out, I think, is an open question. I think that's something that needs to be happening. What's happening with the court reform? So the court ruled against the court reform, and they have made no noises about reinitiating it. And the trial, the court has acceded to Netanyahu's new lawyer's request that the trial, in essence, I'm exaggerating a little bit, the trial be in abeyance until the war is over. It's just outrageous. The 3 judges on the Jerusalem District Court are, I think this is the right term in English, are pliable, malleable in the hands of Netanyahu's lawyers. It is an utter disgrace. And I'm being polite.
Another question. You stated that the only goal should be getting the hostages and eliminating Hamas.
No, I didn't know. I said getting ceasefire and returning the hostages. I said you cannot defeat Hamas.
If this is the case, what should Israel do to eliminate or significantly reduce the threat to its citizens to prevent another October 7th?
So one of the first things that's going to happen is when this is all over, we're going to have commissions of inquiry that are going to have a really hard look at how and why there was such an extraordinary operational intelligence failure. Two, we're going to have to do something that will be hard, and that is to restructure Israeli society. So I told you half an hour ago that we're going to come back to the Haredim, to the Orthodox. If you look at how the government allocates its budget, the extraordinary amount of money that's being thrown on a daily basis, billions of shekels, to the Orthodox who don't do a damn thing in Israel, for Israel, never have, never will, that has to come to an end. And that goes well beyond the fact that they don't serve in the army. We're throwing billions at the Orthodox because that's how Netanyahu buys their votes. When we restructure, as part of restructuring Israeli society, we're going to have very significant restructuring of our budget, which in many ways, when Steve asked a question about resolution, and I told you hostages and ceasefire, the fuller answer to your question, Steve, is that that's part one. Part two is we're going to have to turn away from the Palestinians and have a very difficult internal conversation with ourselves, which is why we need elections. And then two, as I say, reestablish, reinstitute the power of the court, which is why it was good the court voted against the judicial reform. Budget allocation, we need to rebuild the school system. We need to rebuild civil society, and we need to minimize the power of the Orthodox.
Okay. Anti-Semitism seems to either be rising or just more apparent. What is the long-term prognosis for Jews in the world?
So I was just at a extraordinary conference on Thursday in Irvine, in California. There were hundreds of people. There was a terrific conference at UCI, University of California, Irvine, along with the Federation there. I mean, it's clear that there's a spike. I don't know if I call it anti-Semitism, anti-Israelness. I think that's clear. Part of it, if you ask me, is also ignorance that is unfathomable. There was even a survey, I think 2 months ago, when they're yelling river to the sea, if they have any idea what the hell river and which sea. I mean, some of them think it's from the Mississippi to the Caribbean, right? There'll be a need to engage with, particularly with young people. One of the things that I learned at this conference, that the anti-Semitism on college campuses isn't born on college campuses. There's a real spike in anti-Semitism in junior high schools and high schools. That's an issue, which is, I mean, that's why this conference, there were educators there, junior and senior high school educators, to address anti-Semitism at that level rather than waiting until they get to college. I mean, we all know the stories about MIT, which I've written about, MIT, Penn, Harvard, now Yale. That is a problem. And there's no quick fix to that one. I mean, there is no quick fix.
What do you think is going to happen with Netanyahu's trial?
Now, nothing. When he's no longer prime minister, I hope the court will ratchet up and hear and go hear witnesses for 4 or 5 days a week, convict him and put him in jail. Amen.
Okay. There is a second country underneath Gaza. How do you propose neutralizing?
Yeah, I read that question. I don't really understand what that means. I mean, there's Gaza and there's Egypt. I think
he means the tunnels.
Oh, the tunnels. Huh.
That's what I.
Oh, I see. Sorry. Okay.
Okay. How do you propose neutralizing this threat? The Yom Kippur War was ended by Israel going on offensive and responsible Arab state leaders backing down. Since Hamas does not care about the annihilation.
The tunnels, I'll tell you a story about tunnels. In 1990, when I served as legal advisor, I spent a day with a tunnel detecting expert. He's got poor guy who was hot as hell, and he's schlepping all this equipment, which weighs, a ton. And this is 95, 96. And he tells, I was there with a 2-star general, and this poor guy is just frustrated beyond frustrated. He says, we're standing on top of a tunnel, but I can't detect it. It was the first time I personally had any inclination that there were tunnels. But we also need to speak the truth here about the tunnels. The hundreds upon millions of dollars that Bibi Netanyahu put in suitcases and gave to Hamas, which he gave to Hamas in order to weaken the Palestinian Authority. It's what's called in Hebrew a conceptia, the concept. Bibi built up Hamas, but for Bibi, Hamas is a strategic asset. We need to remember that. I referred earlier to Sinwar, the psychopath who's responsible for October 7th. There were, it's undenied, at least 6 opportunities for the Shabak Mossad to kill Sinwar. And every time they came to Netanyahu with an operation plan to kill Sinwar, Bibi said no. So, and so Netanyahu, when you talk about the tunnels, and you're right, sir, to ask about the tunnels, or ma'am, to ask about the tunnels, destroying the tunnels, there have been different ideas put out there. Do you put water in there? But the problem is, or do you put other means of destroying the tunnels? The problem is that I'm not sure if there are hostages in the tunnels. And it has to be really careful with that. And there is no doubt the hundreds upon millions of dollars that they used to build the tunnels. There was even a report 2 weeks ago, I don't know if it was in Haaretz where it was, that Hamas sent engineers. I didn't know they have engineers, but it turns out they have engineers to Russia to learn how to build tunnels. And these tunnels are, I mean, you can just look at the construction of the tunnels in the news. I mean, these are formidable. And we've bombed them, and we've sent troops in there, and tunnels are an enormous problem. And clearly you can see I'm here and there. I have no doubt. I mean, again, all shout out to the soldiers going in there, destroying the tunnels or eviscerating the tunnels or eradicating the tunnels or blowing up the tunnels. It's clearly operationally challenging. There's no doubt about that. But again, I don't know, I'm probably the oldest person here. I remind all of you of the tunnel rats in the Vietnam War, and the difficulty in blowing up tunnels built by the North Vietnamese and the Viet Cong.
Another question. Do you think that October 7th was due to an intelligence failure?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah,
Okay.
the answer is yes, totally.
There have been some conspiracy theories regarding Bibi's desire for a significant event like October 7th to enable him to strike Gaza. Do you think that he sort of knew, or?
Yeah, the answer to that is wait for the commissions of inquiry.
Okay. What do you see the day after Gaza?
Well, I said earlier, Qatar American money, hopefully Hamas less, and the reintroduction of the Palestinian Authority.
And the next question, many Christian evangelists and right-wing American Jews seem to endorse Israel's continuing advance. Won't it be difficult for Biden to slow down American support during an election year?
So I leave politics to President Biden. He doesn't need advice from Amos Guiora. Those right evangelicists and right-wing Jews seem to endorse Israel's continuing advance. I warmly welcome all of those who indicate to get on a goddamn jet plane and put their child in harm's way. I can't be clear about that.
Next question, and I think it may be the last. What will be the future of the communities along the border?
That is a great question. So there's a split. Some families say they're willing to go back to, Kfar Aza and Be'eri and others. Today, the government, a few hours ago, said that families can move back to Sderot. People who live in Sderot said they're not willing to go back. There are 28 kibbutzim that have been evacuated in northern Israel. And until the threat with Hezbollah is addressed one way or another, I don't see people moving back. On the other hand, the government, this is expensive to house 140,000 people. But again, if you allocate budget, throw money at the Orthodox, you don't have money for people who actually need it. Some of the people in the kibbutzim, first of all, they've taken an enormous loss of life. As far as I can tell, there's a split about how many of them are willing to come back, how many are still alive, and how they go about rebuilding the kibbutzim that have been devastated and destroyed. I think it's an open question.
I want to thank you very, very much for.
Thank you.
And for those who came late or have friends who would like to see the interview, it's going to be put online at under110.org. So thank you, Amos. And
my pleasure. And you guys have my email, so anybody can reach out to me.
Yes, please do. He's open to talking to everyone. And there are more questions, but I think this is the end of it. But to be safe, I hope
Thank you
as well. And
Julia, safe travels to you.
Thank you very much.
Take care.
Thank you.
Bye.
Good night.
Laila tov. Toda
Laila
raba.
tov.